What if I told you England's most famous king died rotting alive? The man who executed 2 wives and reshaped an entire nation died in a way so horrifying that the Privy Council kept his death secret for 3 days. In the next few minutes, you'll discover the shocking evidence that proves Henry VII's transformation from Golden Prince to 400B monster. Evidence that historians tried to hide from the world. This comes from newly analysed court physician records and forensic examination of his actual remains. So, before we unpack this horrible story, do me a favour. Hit that like button if you enjoy these darker dives into history, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is. Picture this. It's January 1536. The tilt yard at Greenwich Palace is buzzing. Trumpets blare, the crowd roars, and here comes Henry VIII. He's 44 years old, but still every inch the Golden Prince. Broad-shouldered, handsome, armoured like a knight from legend. This is the Henry people adored. Poet, musician, athlete, warrior. The king mounts his war horse, gleaming in plate armour that cost more than most peasants would see in a lifetime. He lowers his visor, steadies his lance and charges. The ground shakes under the hooves. This is Henry's element. He's done it 1,000 times before, but today, something goes terribly wrong. His horse stumbles. In an instant, 300 pounds of man and steel come crashing down. The crowd gasps as the great Henry is thrown to the frozen earth, and then the armoured beast falls on top of him in silence. Did England just lose its king to sport? For 2 hours, 2 endless hours, Henry lies unconscious. Imagine the panic. No king, no clear air. His wife Anne Boleyn pregnant and praying this child will be a boy. Courtiers hold their breath, terrified of what comes next. When Henry finally stirs, the court sighs in relief. But something has changed. Witnesses swear the king's eyes, once full of charm and warmth, are now cold, unpredictable. His first words aren't thanks for surviving, they're fury. He screams, demanding to know why the tournament was stopped. The Renaissance prince who could speak 4 languages, who wrote poetry, composed music, who danced until dawn and debated theology with Europe's finest minds. Now that man had been changed completely. In his place rose a different Henry, darker, paranoid, and far more dangerous. And as we'll see, that accident wasn't just the fall of a king, it was the start of a slow, rotting descent into horror. The fall didn't just knock Henry out, it ripped open an old leg injury from years earlier. At first, it looked like just another jousting wound. Painful, yes, but he was Henry VIII, the king who prided himself on strength. He thought he'd recover like always. He didn't. The break above his knee was bad enough, but the reopened wound refused to heal. Infection set in. What started as a bruise and swelling soon became an ulcer, a deep, oozing sore that tunneled into the flesh. And this was the 1500s. No antibiotics, no sterile surgery, no real understanding of infection. For Henry, it was a slow-motion death sentence. Court doctors did what they thought best, and only made it worse. They packed his wounds with arsenic paste, hoping to draw out corruption. Then they burned the flesh with red-hot irons. Imagine that, lying there as they pressed searing metal into your open wound. The smell of your own skin burning while everyone nodded like it was good medicine. But it didn't work. The ulcer grew angrier, deeper, fouler. Within weeks, the King of England, once the most dazzling man in Europe, carried a secret no perfume could hide. His legs stank of rot. Pus and blood seeped daily. Courtiers whispered about the smell long before he entered a room. The ulcer wasn't just eating his flesh, it was eating his life. And here's the twist. This wound didn't just cripple him physically, it poisoned him, body and mind. Henry wasn't just fighting pain, he was slowly drowning in infection, day after day, year after year. This wasn't a wound anymore, it was a curse, and it would change Henry VIII from Golden Prince into something far darker. Imagine stepping into the royal chamber, expecting the fragrance of roses, incense and polished wood, and instead being hit with a wall of stench so foul it makes you gag. That's what life at Henry's court became. By now, the ulcers in his legs were unstoppable. They oozed pus every day, sometimes filling bowls that servants had to carry away like chamber pots. And the smell, it was legendary. Chroniclers wrote that you could smell the king before you saw him. Henry tried everything to cover it up. He drenched himself in expensive perfumes, rose oil, ambergris, musk. The palace burned herbs and incense non-stop. Floors were sprinkled with petals to mask the air. But nothing could hide the rot of a king who was literally decaying while alive. And the court had no choice but to endure it. Imagine standing before the throne trying to bow and smile while your stomach turns, fighting the urge to vomit. Some courtiers couldn't hold it back. They fainted or ran gagging from the room, but nobody dared speak of it. Because when you're standing in front of Henry VIII, even gagging could be taken as an insult. And insults, well, Henry had a simple solution for that. Execution. The smell wasn't just an embarrassment, it was a warning. The ulcers were poisoning his blood, seeping toxins into his body, twisting his moods, clouding his mind. The charming prince who once played music and wrote poetry was gone. In his place was a man who carried his rot with him like a crown. The stench wasn't just in the air, it was in his reign, clinging to every decision, every execution, every act of paranoia. The King of England had become the monster in his own court. Henry, once celebrated as the Renaissance prince, charming, witty, generous, turned into something else entirely. He became unpredictable, explosive, and terrifying. One day he might be laughing with friends, listening to music, even weeping openly. The next, those same friends could be in the Tower, accused of treason on the thinnest whispers. The ulcer in his leg didn't just fester, it fed his paranoia. He saw betrayal everywhere. Anne Boleyn, the woman he once risked his crown for, was beheaded just 4 months after his accident. Thomas Cromwell, his most trusted advisor, gone, executed. Even servants walked on eggshells. A sneeze in the wrong moment could be twisted into an assassination attempt. Historians today suspect Henry suffered brain damage during that fall, his frontal lobe smashed, the very part of the brain that controls impulse and judgment. Combine that with the constant agony from his legs, the fever from infection, and the paranoia fueled by pain, and you get a king who ruled with a bloody fist. He wasn't just killing enemies, he was killing friends, and he was doing it with a conviction that he was always right, always justified. England no longer had a golden prince leading it. It had a tyrant, a king who reeked of rot, lashed out in fury and believed his own nightmares were real. And the worst part, this was just the beginning, because Henry's body hadn't finished breaking him yet. By the 1540s, Henry's body wasn't just sick, it was collapsing under its own weight. The once athletic king who jousted and danced until sunrise was now swollen, immobile and monstrous in size. How bad was it? His waist ballooned to over 50 inches, bigger than some modern refrigerators. His armour had to be remade just to fit his growing belly. Doorways in his palaces were widened, floors reinforced. Even his chairs had removable arms because he couldn't squeeze into them anymore. And his daily routine? It was no longer fit for a king, it was an engineering project. He couldn't dress himself. Servants lifted his massive legs into his clothes. A system of ropes and pulleys had to be rigged just to hoist him upright. Imagine the most powerful man in England, once the symbol of virility, dangling like a sack of meat just to stand. The infection in his legs made every step torture. The ulcers leaked constantly, soaking bandages that had to be changed again and again, filling bowls with pus and blood. Tailors padded his clothes not for comfort, but to absorb the seepage so it wouldn't stain the floor. And still the smell clung to him, no matter how much perfume he drowned himself in. But it wasn't just his body falling apart. His pride, his image, was crumbling too. The man who once demanded portraits of himself as a strong, handsome prince now had to order painters to lie, to show him standing tall and broad-shouldered, legs powerful, face composed. It was all theatre. Behind the canvas, Henry was a rotting giant trapped in his own body. The Golden Prince was gone forever. What remained was a bloated monster, both pitied and feared, carried from room to room like a grotesque relic. By the mid-1540s, Henry wasn't just sick in body, he was unravelling in mind. Pain, infection, and paranoia had eaten away at him until he was barely recognisable as human, and now the ghost came. Servants whispered that the king spoke to people no one else could see. He would stop mid-conversation, staring at an empty chair, his face draining of colour, then he'd mutter, "Not now," or leave me, as if swatting away invisible visitors. But sometimes he didn't whisper. Sometimes he screamed. One ambassador reported Henry shouting at nothing across the banquet hall, his massive body trembling with rage as he accused Anne Boleyn, his executed queen, of mocking him from beyond the grave. "I took your head once, I'll take it again," he bellowed, pointing at an empty space while the court sat frozen in horror. Other times, he argued with his long-dead father, or begged his mother, gone for decades, to comfort him. He called out to lost children, stillborns and miscarriages, as if they might answer. It wasn't just grief, it was madness. His paranoia hit terrifying new levels. He forced servants to bring him his pus-soaked bandages so he could sniff them for poison. He made tasters try not only his food, but even his medicine and ointments, convinced every hand was plotting to kill him. Courtiers lived in terror. They created a secret code of coloured ribbons to warn each other of Henry's mood. Red meant rage, black meant despair, white meant calm, which grew rarer and rarer. One wrong move, one misstep, could end with the king screaming for your execution. Haunted by ghosts drowning in paranoia, Henry VIII had become something worse than a tyrant. He was a madman with a crown. By January 1547, Henry VIII was a walking corpse, except most days he couldn't even walk. His body was rotting from the inside out. His legs were black and split open, leaking foul fluid through layer after layer of bandages. His skin turned a sickly yellow, his eyes bloodshot and swollen in pouches of flesh. He was in constant agony. 6 men were needed just to roll him over in bed. His tongue swelled so badly he could barely form words. When he tried to speak, it came out as a wet gargle. The once mighty king who could command armies and bend a nation's religion with his voice now couldn't even ask for water without someone guessing what he meant. And the smell? By now it was unbearable. No amount of perfume, incense or herbs could mask it. Courtiers fainted when they changed his sheets. Windows were kept open even in the freezing January air, because a closed chamber with Henry inside was unlivable. But the physical torment was only half of it. His mind was just as broken. One moment, he begged doctors to save him, offering them riches beyond measure. The next, he cursed them, threatening torture for failing to ease his pain. In delirium, he called out for his long-dead mother. He apologised to his brother Arthur, gone since 1502, for taking both his throne and his wife. Most haunting of all, he cried out for Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, abandoned and dead for more than a decade, asking her to forgive him. The king who once ruled with fire and fury now begged ghosts for mercy. Everyone at court knew the truth. The end was coming. The only question was how horrifying it would be. January 27th, 1547. Whitehall Palace. The King of England is dying and is anything but peaceful. Henry's body is failing on every level. His kidneys are shutting down. His belly is swollen like a drum. His breath reeks of rotting meat. And then the seizures start. 6 men struggle to hold him down as his massive body convulses with such force the reinforced bed cracks beneath him. Black bile spews from his mouth. The smell is so overpowering that even Archbishop Cranmer, called to give last rites, has to excuse himself twice to vomit. Between the fits, Henry cries out for children who never lived. He begs miscarried babies to forgive him. He promises to be a better father if they'll just come back. Then his voice shifts to terror. He screams about fire, about flames licking at his bed, demanding someone put it out. But of course only he can see it. By 2 a.m, his breathing changes, the dreaded death rattle. Wet, gurgling, as his lungs fill with fluid. Cranmer takes the king's swollen hand and begs him to show some sign of faith before he passes. Henry squeezes weakly. Moments later his grip slackens. At 2:07 a.m, Henry VIII is dead. But even in death the horror isn't over. Far from it. His body, bloated and infected, begins to decompose almost instantly. Gases swell his corpse. His coffin groans and bulges. And what happens on the journey to Windsor Castle is so grotesque, it would be whispered about in fear for centuries. Henry VIII, the once golden prince of Europe, wasn't finished terrifying his kingdom, not yet. Henry VIII was dead, but the nightmare was just getting started. His body decomposed at an unnatural speed. Years of infection, rot and disease didn't stop when his heart did. They accelerated. Within hours, his corpse swelled grotesquely. Gases pushed against the lead coffin until it creaked and bulged like it was alive. The Privy Council panicked. They kept his death secret for 3 days, telling everyone the king was resting. While behind the scenes, embalmers fought a losing battle. They stuffed his body with salt, herbs, and tar. They wrapped him in waxed cloth. They sealed him up in layers of lead. But nothing could stop the decay. On February 14th, the bloated coffin was loaded onto a massive carriage pulled by 8 straining horses. The journey to Windsor should have taken a day, but it dragged into 3, slowed by mud, weather, and the sheer weight of the dead king. On the second night, the procession stopped at Sion Abbey, irony of ironies, one of the very monasteries Henry had destroyed years earlier. His coffin was laid in the chapel, and that's when it happened. With a sound like a thunderclap, the coffin burst. Putrid fluids spilled onto the floor, soaking the stones. The stench drove guards outside, and in the morning came the final insult. Dogs had slipped in during the night and were found licking at the king's remains. The man who once styled himself as God's anointed, who broke from Rome to command his people's souls, ended up as carrion, his body lapped at by stray animals. The court resealed the coffin in shame, wrapped it in extra cloth, and hurried the procession to Windsor. The truth was buried under silence. Officially, Henry died peacefully, honoured as a king, but those who witnessed Sion Abbey knew the real story. The Golden Prince had become a grotesque legend. After Sion Abbey, the Privy Council knew one thing. The true story of Henry's death could never reach the people. England couldn't see its mighty king as a rotting corpse, bursting open and fed upon by dogs. So they buried the truth, literally and politically. When Henry's coffin finally reached Windsor Castle, the burial was rushed. No grand ceremony, no display of the royal body, just a quiet interment, sealed under stone and silence. Witnesses to the explosion were sworn to secrecy under threat of death. Official records claimed Henry died peacefully, surrounded by honour and dignity. The image of the handsomest prince in Christendom had to survive, even if the man hadn't. And it worked. For centuries the official story held. Painters like Holbein left us portraits of a broad-shouldered, defiant king in his famous power stance. An image of strength, not rot. The reality of ulcers, pus, paranoia and madness was hidden behind canvas and crown. But diaries, ambassador reports and secret physician notes tell a very different tale. A tale of a king who died screaming, stinking and broken. A king whose own body betrayed him until it literally burst. That was the real Henry VIII. Not just the man who executed wives, tore England from the Catholic Church and ruled with fear, but the man who rotted from the inside out, undone by his own flesh. It's a reminder history rarely gives us. Kings may build empires, they may bend nations to their will, but in the end, they rot like everyone else.